Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English B, and our objective now for the hour is to give some time to Graham Greene's classic short story, A Shocking Accident. You ought to be on page 1262, 1263 of your hymnals. I'm going to start with Graham Greene's dates. Do you see them on 1263? Notice the dates. 1904, he dies in 1991, which tells you that we really are now moving towards dates and people who are living much closer to your time period. Now we're going to consider, this is important for your notes, we're going to consider Shocking Accident and Graham Greene's story in relationship to D.H. Lawrence's story, Rocking Horse Winter. They will oftentimes be read together because of their ending. You might want to write that down. Because of their ending. So there's going to be some interest there. Okay? Now, this is a story, let's begin by pointing out, this is the story about the absurdities of life. To say life is absurd means what? What does it mean to say life is absurd? Doesn't always make sense, does it? Right, doesn't always make sense. The way that this story kind of does this, you're going to have a prep school boy who's going to learn about his daddy, whom he hardly knows and whom he has romanticized. All right? And he's died in an abrupt, embarrassing manner. Are you ready for this? A pig falls on it. No kidding, a pig falls on it. Okay? The bizarre nature of the accident haunts the young man as he grows up, making him feel isolated, odd, at times alienated. But we're going to have a surprising twist at the end of the story, because he's going to have an intended bride. She doesn't laugh when she hears this story the first time. She is, in fact, sympathetic to him. And in so doing, shows him that even in the face of absurdity, or insanity, as you might think, right, people can find comfort, some kind of stability maybe. Ironically, the young man's sense of humiliation will end when another person appreciates the ghastliness of his father's absurd death. Let's go ahead and listen. Graham Greene, what a genius in terms of his ability to command the language, not unlike D.H. Lawrence. They both are very, very gifted in this regards. Let's just listen and do a close reading now of the story, okay? We are working towards the end of the story, all right? Here we go.
By Graham Greene. 1. Jerome was called into his housemaster's room in the break between the second and the third class on a Thursday morning. He had no fear of trouble, for he was a warden, the name that the proprietor and headmaster of a rather expensive preparatory school had chosen to give to approved reliable boys in the lower forms. From a warden, one became a guardian, and finally, before leaving, it was hoped for Marlborough or Rugby, a crusader. The housemaster, Mr. Wordsworth, sat behind his desk with an appearance of perplexity and apprehension. Jerome had the odd impression when he entered that he was a cause of fear. "Sit down, Jerome," Mr. Wordsworth said. "All going well with the trigonometry?" "Yes, sir." "I've had a telephone call, Jerome, from your aunt. I'm afraid I have bad news for you." "Yes, sir?" "Your father has had an accident." "Oh." Mr. Wordsworth looked at him with some surprise. "A serious accident." "Yes, sir?" Jerome worshipped his father. The verb is exact. As man recreates God, so Jerome recreated his father. From a restless, widowed author into a mysterious adventurer who traveled in far places. Nice, Beirut, Majorca, even the Canaries. The time had arrived about his 8th birthday when Jerome believed that his father either ran guns or was a member of the British Secret Service. Now it occurred to him that his father might have been wounded in a hail of machine gun bullets. Mr. Wordsworth played with the ruler on his desk. He seemed at a loss how to continue. He said, "You knew your father was in Naples." "Yes, sir." "Your aunt heard from the hospital today." "Oh," Mr. Wordsworth said with desperation. "It was a street accident." "Yes, sir?" "It seemed quite likely to Jerome that they would call it a street accident. The police, of course, had fired first. His father would not take human life except as a last resort. "I'm afraid your father was very seriously hurt indeed." "Oh. In fact, Jerome, he died yesterday. Quite without pain." "Did they shoot him through the heart?" "I beg your pardon? What did you say, Jerome?" "Did they shoot him through the heart?" "Nobody shot him, Jerome. A pig fell on him." An inexplicable convulsion took place in the nerves of Mr. Wordsworth's face. It really looked for a moment as though he were going to laugh. He closed his eyes, composed his features, and said rapidly, as though it were necessary to expel the story as rapidly as possible, "Your father was walking along a street in Naples when a pig fell on him. A shocking accident. Apparently, in the poorer quarters of Naples, they keep pigs on their balconies. This one was on the 5th floor. It had grown too fat. The balcony broke. The pig fell on your father." Mr. Wordsworth left his desk rapidly and went to the window, turning his back on Jerome. He shook a little with emotion. Jerome said, "What happened to the pig?" 2. This was not carelessness on the part of Jerome, as it was interpreted by Mr. Wordsworth to his colleagues. He even discussed with them whether perhaps Jerome was not yet fitted to be a warden. Jerome was only attempting to visualize the strange scene and to get the details right. Nor was Jerome a boy who cried. He was a boy who brooded, and it never occurred to him at his preparatory school that the circumstances of his father's death were comic. They were still part of the mystery of life. It was later in his first term at his public school, when he told the story to his best friend, that he began to realize how it affected others. Naturally, after that disclosure, he was known, rather unreasonably, as Pig. Unfortunately, his aunt had no sense of humor. There was an enlarged snapshot of his father on the piano. A large, sad man in an unsuitable dark suit posed in capri with an umbrella to guard him against sunstroke. The Fraglioni rocks forming the background. By the age of 16, Jerome was well aware that the portrait looked more like the author of Sunshine and Shade and Rambles in the Balearics than an agent of the Secret Service. All the same, he loved the memory of his father. He still possessed an album filled with picture postcards. The stamps had been soaked off long ago for his other collection, and it pained him when his aunt embarked with strangers on the story of his father's death. "A shocking accident," she would begin, and the stranger would compose his or her features into the correct shape for interest and commiseration. Both reactions, of course, were false, but it was terrible for Jerome to see how suddenly, midway in her rambling discourse, the interest would become genuine. "I can't think how such things can be allowed in a civilized country," his aunt would say. "I suppose one has to regard Italy as civilized. One is prepared for all kinds of things abroad, of course, and my brother was a great traveler. He always carried a water filter with him. It was far less expensive, you know, than buying all those bottles of mineral water. My brother always said that his filter paid for his dinner wine. You can see from that what a careful man he was. But who could possibly have expected when he was walking along the Via Dottore Emanuele Panucci on his way to the Hydrographic Museum that a pig would fall on him?" That was the moment when the interest became genuine. Jerome's father had not been a distinguished writer, but the time always seems to come after an author's death when somebody thinks it's worth his while to write a letter to the Times Literary Supplement announcing the preparation of a biography and asking to see any letters or documents or receive any anecdotes from friends of the dead man. Most of the biographies, of course, never appear. One wonders whether the whole thing may not be an obscure form of blackmail, and whether many a potential writer of a biography or thesis finds the means in this way to finish his education at Kansas or Nottingham. Jerome, however, as a chartered accountant, lived far from the literary world. He did not realize how small the menace really was. nor that the danger period for someone of his father's obscurity had long passed. Sometimes he rehearsed the method of recounting his father's death so as to reduce the comic element to its smallest dimensions. It would be of no use to refuse information, for in that case the biographer would undoubtedly visit his aunt, who was living to a great old age with no sign of flagging. It seemed to Jerome that there were two possible methods. The first led gently up to the accident, so well prepared that the death came really as an anticlimax. The chief danger of laughter in such a story was always surprise. When he rehearsed this method, Jerome began boringly enough. You know Naples and those high tenement buildings? Somebody once told me that the Neapolitan always feels at home in New York, just as the man from Turin feels at home in London, because the river runs in much the same way in both cities. Where was I? Oh, yes, Naples, of course. You'd be surprised in the poorer quarters what things they keep on the balconies of those skyscraping tenements. Not washing, you know, or bedding, but things like livestock, chickens, or even pigs. Of course, the pigs get no exercise whatever and fatten all the quicker. He could imagine how his hearer's eyes would have glazed by this time. I've no idea, have you, how heavy a pig can be? But those old buildings are all badly in need of repair. A balcony on the 5th floor gave way under one of those pigs. It struck the 3rd floor balcony on its way down and sort of ricocheted into the street. My father was on the way to the Hydrographic Museum when the pig hit him. Coming from that height and that angle, it broke his neck. This was really a masterly attempt to make an intrinsically interesting subject boring. The other method Jerome rehearsed had the virtue of brevity. My father was killed by a pig. Really? In India? No, in Italy. How interesting! I never realized there was pig sticking in Italy. Was your father keen on polo? In course of time, neither too early nor too late, rather as though in his capacity as a chartered accountant, Jerome had studied the statistics and taken the average, he became engaged to be married to a pleasant, fresh-faced girl of 25, whose father was a doctor in Pinner. Her name was Sally. Her favorite author was still Hugh Walpole, and she had adored babies ever since she had been given a doll at the age of 5, which moved its eyes and made water. Their relationship was contented, rather than exciting, as became the love affair of a chartered accountant. It would never have done if it had interfered with the figures. One thought worried Jerome, however. Now that within a year he might himself become a father, his love for the dead man increased. He realized what affection had gone into the picture postcards. He felt a longing to protect his memory, and uncertain whether this quiet love of his would survive if Sally were so insensitive as to laugh when she heard the story of his father's death. Inevitably, she would hear it when Jerome brought her to dinner with his aunt. Several times he tried to tell her himself, as she was naturally anxious to know all she could that concerned him. You were very small when your father died? Just 9. Poor little boy, she said. I was at school. They broke the news to me. Did you take it very hard? I can't remember. You never told me how it happened. It was very sudden. A street accident. You'll never drive fast, will you, Jemmy? She had begun to call him Jemmy. It was too late then to try the second method, the one he thought of as the pig-sticking one. They were going to marry quietly at a registry office and have their honeymoon at Torquay. He avoided taking her to see his aunt until a week before the wedding, but then the night came and he could not have told himself whether his apprehension was more for his father's memory or the security of his own love. The moment came all too soon. Is that Jemmy's father? Sally asked, picking up the portrait of the man with the umbrella. Yes, dear. How did you guess? He has Jemmy's eyes and brow, hasn't he? Has Jerome lent you his books? No. I will give you a set for your wedding. He wrote so tenderly about his travels. My own favorite is Nooks and Crannies. He would have had a great future. It made that shocking accident all the worse. Yes? How Jerome longed to leave the room and not see that loved face crinkle with irresistible amusement. I had so many letters from his readers after the pig fell on him. She had never been so abrupt before. And then the miracle happened. Sally did not laugh. Sally sat with open eyes of horror while his aunt told her the story, and at the end, "How horrible," Sally said. "It makes you think, doesn't it? Happening like that, out of a clear sky." Jerome's heart sang with joy. It was as though she had appeased his fear forever. In the taxi going home, he kissed her with more passion than he had ever shown, and she returned it. There were babies in her pale blue pupils, babies that rolled their eyes and made water. "A week today," Jerome said, and she squeezed his hand. "Penny for your thoughts, my darling." "I was wondering," Sally said, "what happened to the poor pig?" "They almost certainly had it for dinner," Jerome said happily, and kissed the dear child again.
Now, real quickly, let's jot down what you want to say about the ending of this story and the ways in which this story has a somewhat similar surprising ending to D.H. Lawrence's Rocking Horse Winter. Notice the question, what happened to the pig, becomes kind of like, we might say, a refrain, right? Where that question becomes central to somehow the major themes of the story itself. Okay? What is the major theme of a story like this, do you think? What is the major theme of a story like this? Is it as simple as one student once said, poop happens, and then you got to get over it? And some of you will say, yeah, that's kind of maybe part of it. What is the difference, though, in the end? Why is it that finally, in the end, he's able to get beyond this shocking accident? In a word, what is it? Love, right? Love, understanding. Yeah, someone shows him true compassion, true love. And then, out of all of the insanity that is that experience, right, you can kind of somehow come to some meaning out of the chaos, out of the insanity of it all. Jot down at 3A real quickly at the comparison between two texts. What is for you the single most interesting comparison between Rocking Horse Winter and Shocking Accident? How do they kind of go together? In what ways are they somewhat similar kinds of stories? Okay? What is one way, at least, that they are similar? What'd you say? What's one way that they're kind of similar texts? Good, yes. They both deal with surprising, shocking, unexpected death. Notice in both of the stories, children have a certain kind of understanding of parent, which maybe isn't completely correct, right? Paul, of course, thinking about her mother, about his mother, certain kinds of assumptions. And of course, in our story here, what does it mean to say that the son romanticized his father, who he barely knew? What does that even mean, to say you romanticize? Do you know what that term means? What does that term mean? Yeah, you kind of make up in your mind, you kind of see the person a little bit better than maybe he or she is, right? So that when the experience of being told about his death comes, he assumes that his dad must have what? Right, died in some kind of great, glorious gunfight or something like that. No, a pig fell on his head, right? Kind of obviously shocking. All right, there you go. An introduction to the work of Graham Greene.